At the time this happened, I was 29 years old, living alone in a small apartment just outside of Portland. I worked as a night shift sound engineer at a local recording studio, which meant my life ran opposite to almost everyone else's. I usually started work when people were finishing dinner and drove home when most of the city was asleep. I didn't mind it. In fact, I loved the quiet. There was something peaceful about empty highways, neon signs reflecting off wet asphalt, and the soft hum of my car engine filling the silence. My car was a dark blue 2014 Ford Fusion. Nothing flashy, but I'd owned it for years. I knew every sound it made, every vibration, every little quirk. I trusted that car more than I trusted most people. That's why what happened that October night still doesn't make any sense to me. It was a Friday, sometime in late fall, and the weather had turned ugly fast. By the time I left the studio, the rain was coming down hard enough to blur the parking lot lights into giant glowing halos. I remember standing under the building awning for a moment, holding my backpack over my head as if that would somehow help, staring out at the storm while debating whether I should just sleep on the office couch. I'd been editing audio for nearly 12 hours straight. My eyes burned from staring at waveforms on screens all night. My shoulders were stiff, and I had a dull headache building behind my temples. But home was only about an hour away, and my own bed sounded a lot better than a studio couch that smelled like old coffee and cables. By the time I got in the car, it was 12:48 in the morning. The dashboard lights came on in that familiar amber glow, and for a second, everything felt normal. I tossed my backpack into the passenger seat, started the engine, and turned on the heater while rain hammered against the windshield. The radio picked up some old classic rock station between bursts of static, and I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Route 9, the fastest road home. I'd driven that road hundreds of times. Long stretches of forest, almost no traffic after midnight, and barely any streetlights once you got 20 miles out of town. Most people hated it. I loved it. Or at least, I used to. About 30 minutes into the drive, I was completely alone on the road. No headlights behind me, no taillights ahead, just my beams cutting through sheets of rain and rows of pine trees stretching endlessly on both sides of the highway. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in perfect rhythm, and I found myself zoning out, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel, thinking about absolutely nothing. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a deer standing near the shoulder. Then my headlights got closer, and I realized it was a person, a man, standing completely still in the rain. He was tall, maybe 6 foot or a little more, wearing what looked like a dark overcoat. No umbrella, no flashlight, no car nearby, nothing. He wasn't waving for help, wasn't moving at all, just standing there on the side of Route 9 in the middle of nowhere at nearly 1:30 in the morning. Every instinct told me to keep driving. In fact, I did. I passed him without slowing down, gripping the steering wheel tighter as his figure disappeared into my rearview mirror. I remember laughing nervously to myself, telling myself it was probably just some drunk guy or someone whose car broke down nearby. But after about 50 yards, guilt started creeping in. Maybe he needed help. Maybe his phone was dead. Maybe if I kept driving and something happened to him, I'd think about it forever. So I slowed down, checked my mirrors, made a careful U-turn on the empty road, and drove back. When I reached him again, I rolled down the passenger window halfway. Cold rain immediately sprayed into the car. The man slowly turned his head toward me, and even in the darkness, something about his face looked wrong. Not deformed, not injured, just pale. Too pale, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in years. I forced a smile and asked if he needed a ride. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for several seconds before nodding once and walking toward the car. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, like every step was something he had to consciously think about. When he opened the back door and got in, I instantly felt the temperature inside the car drop. I'm not exaggerating. The windows fogged from the inside so fast I thought my heater had broken. I glanced in the rearview mirror and caught a quick look at him sitting directly behind me. His clothes were soaked, but strangely, the seat beneath him stayed completely dry. No water, no mud, nothing. Just him, sitting perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. I tried making small talk, asked where he was headed, asked if his car had broken down, asked if he lived nearby. Every question was met with silence. The only sound in the car was the rain, the engine, and my own increasingly nervous breathing. After a few minutes, I gave up trying. I just kept driving, watching him in the mirror every few seconds. And every single time I looked, he was already looking back at me. Then I checked the dashboard clock. 1:33 a.m. I looked away for maybe 2 seconds. Looked back. Still 1:33. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Still 1:33. That's when I realized something even worse. I'd been driving straight for miles, but the same gas station sign kept appearing on the right side of the road. Same broken neon light, same faded sign, same empty parking lot. Over and over. And then, for the first time, the man in my back seat finally spoke. In a voice so quiet I almost thought I imagined it, he leaned forward slightly and whispered, "I died here in 1987. And when I looked into the rearview mirror, the back seat was empty. But the rear door was slowly swinging open at 70 miles an hour. I was 27 when this happened, working as a freelance photographer and spending more nights on the road than I ever did at home. Most of my jobs involved driving between small towns across the Midwest, shooting real estate, local businesses, sometimes weddings if the money was good enough. I drove so much that my car felt more like home than my apartment did. I knew every shortcut, every back road, every gas station worth stopping at, and every stretch of highway where you'd lose phone signal for miles. Drive midnight never bothered me. If anything, I preferred it. Less traffic, less noise, just me, the road, and whatever music happened to be playing through the speakers. That's why, when I started that drive through rural Kansas on a cold November night, I wasn't nervous at all. Looking back, I really wish I had been. I'd just finished a 3-day shoot in a tiny farming town about 2 hours outside of Wichita. I was exhausted, running on bad coffee and maybe 4 hours of sleep spread across 2 days. But I wanted my own bed more than anything. It was a little after midnight when I packed my camera gear into the trunk, climbed into my SUV, and started the drive home. The temperature had dropped hard after sunset. Frost covered the edges of the windshield, and every breath I took inside the car fogged the glass for a second before the heater cleared it away. There wasn't any rain that night, just a low blanket of fog rolling across the fields, thick enough to swallow entire roads. For the first hour, everything felt normal. The GPS sat mounted on my dashboard, giving calm turn-by-turn directions while old rock songs played quietly through the speakers. My headlights cut through endless stretches of farmland, illuminating fence posts, road signs, and empty fields disappearing into darkness. Every now and then, I'd pass an old barn or a farmhouse with a single porch light glowing in the distance. But for the most part, I was completely alone. No traffic, no gas stations, no houses. Just black fields stretching endlessly under a moon I couldn't even see through the fog. At around 1:14 in the morning, my GPS suddenly recalculated. I didn't think much of it at first. Sometimes it rerouted around construction or road closures. I glanced down and noticed it was taking me off the highway onto a smaller 2-lane road I'd never driven before. The map showed it reconnecting with the main route about 20 miles ahead, so I followed it without thinking. The road narrowed almost immediately. The center lines disappeared, replaced by cracked pavement and overgrown grass creeping onto both shoulders. Tall trees started closing in from both sides, their branches stretching overhead until they almost formed a tunnel. My radio began filling with static, then silence. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual out there, but still, something about it made me uneasy. I rolled my shoulders, turned the heater up a little higher, and kept driving. The fog got thicker the farther I went, so thick that my headlights barely reached 20 feet in front of the car. It felt like driving through clouds. The world outside my windshield had become nothing but white mist and shadows. Then, out of nowhere, I saw lights ahead. At first, I thought it was another car. But as I got closer, I realized it was a town. A small one, maybe a dozen buildings lined along both sides of the road, all lit by old yellow street lamps. There was a diner, a gas station, a church with a white steeple, a grocery store with faded lettering. It looked like something frozen in time, like a town from the 1950s that had somehow never changed. I slowed down instinctively, staring out the windows as I drove through. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Every building was perfectly clean, every porch light worked, every parked car looked polished. But there was one thing missing. People. There wasn't a single person anywhere. No cars moving, no lights turning on inside houses, nothing. It felt less like a town and more like a movie set waiting for actors who never showed up. My GPS suddenly went blank. The screen didn't freeze. It didn't lose power. The map simply disappeared, replaced by a black screen. My radio stayed silent. My phone still had no signal. And that's when I noticed something else. Every clock I could see, on the dashboard, on the GPS, even on my phone, read exactly 1:14 a.m., the same time they'd shown 20 minutes ago. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I drove faster, eager to get through whatever weird little town this was. But after passing the diner, I passed it again. Same sign, same parked pickup truck, same flickering street lamp. I frowned, convinced I'd somehow turned around without realizing it. But the road never curved. I was driving straight. I knew I was driving straight. I passed the church again, then the grocery store, then the diner. Again and again. My breathing started getting heavier with every lap. I checked my mirrors constantly, half expecting to see another car behind me, but the road stayed empty. The fog outside the town limits never got closer. It was like the road simply refused to let me leave. Then I looked toward the sidewalk beside the diner, and my stomach dropped. There was someone standing there now. An old woman. She hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. She stood completely still under the street lamp, wearing a long gray coat that hung almost to the ground. Her face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel her watching me as I drove past. And then, she smiled. Not waved, not nodded, just smiled, and raised one finger, pointing toward the passenger seat beside me. My blood turned cold, because I wasn't alone anymore. Something was sitting next to me. And whatever it was, it had been there long enough for the seatbelt light to turn off. I was 24 when this happened, fresh out of college and working my first real job as a junior graphic designer in Denver. I had just started building a life for myself. New apartment, new job, new routines. The kind of life where every week felt like proof that I was finally becoming an adult. Money was tight, my sleep schedule was terrible, and I was living mostly on takeout and caffeine, but I was happy. At least, I thought I was. My parents lived about 3 hours away in a small mountain town, and every couple of weekends I'd make the drive out to visit them. Most people hated driving through the mountains at night, especially during winter, but I'd always loved it. There was something about winding roads, pine trees, and endless darkness broken only by headlights that made me feel calm. That was before one drive changed the way I looked at rearview mirrors forever. It was early December, and I had stayed later than usual after visiting my parents. My mom kept trying to convince me to spend the night, but I had a client meeting the next morning, so I left a little after midnight despite the weather. The air was freezing, cold enough that my breath came out in thick clouds while I loaded my overnight bag into the trunk. Snow wasn't falling yet, but the sky looked heavy, like it was waiting for the right moment. My dad walked me to the car, hands buried in his jacket, and told me to text when I got home. I laughed, promised I would, and pulled out of the driveway without thinking twice. Looking back now, I wish I'd stayed. The first hour of the drive felt completely normal. My heater was blasting warm air across my hands, while soft music played through the speakers. The highway was mostly empty, just long stretches of asphalt cutting through pine-covered mountains. Every few miles, I'd pass a lonely gas station or a roadside diner with neon lights glowing in the distance. But for the most part, I had the road entirely to myself. My headlights bounced off snow piled along the shoulders, and the windshield reflected the soft orange glow of the dashboard. I remember feeling relaxed, almost sleepy. The kind of peaceful tired where your body moves on instinct while your mind drifts somewhere else. At around 1:40 in the morning, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. That alone wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was how far back they were. Tiny, barely visible, just two little white dots weaving gently through the darkness behind me. I glanced at them once, then focused back on the road. A few minutes later, I checked again. They were closer now. Still not strange. Mountain roads can make distances feel weird at night. I turned my music down slightly, stretched my shoulders, and kept driving. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Every time I looked in the mirror, those headlights were still there, at exactly the same distance, never getting closer, never falling farther behind, just there, watching, following. I told myself I was imagining things. I was tired, overthinking. Maybe we were both driving the same speed. That happens all the time. So I tested it. I pressed the gas a little harder, taking my speed from 60 to 75. My engine responded instantly, the trees outside blurring faster as I moved through the mountain curves. I checked the mirror again. Same distance. I slowed down to 50, checked again. Same distance. That's when the first wave of real fear hit me. Not panic, not yet. Just that heavy sinking feeling in your stomach when your brain notices something your logic can't explain. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept watching the mirror every few seconds, hoping I'd finally see the headlights disappear around a curve or take an exit. But they didn't. They stayed exactly where they were, mile after mile after mile. Eventually, I reached a small roadside gas station that stayed open 24 hours for truck drivers. I decided I'd stop for coffee, maybe wake myself up a little, maybe let the other car pass. I pulled into the lot slowly, tires crunching over patches of old ice, and parked under the bright fluorescent lights. The gas station looked warm and welcoming after hours of dark mountain roads. I turned off the engine, leaned back in my seat, and watched the highway through the windshield. The headlights never passed. I sat there for almost 2 minutes, staring at the road, waiting to see the car go by. Nothing. No engine sounds, no taillights, no movement. Just empty road. My hands were shaking now. I told myself I was being ridiculous, stepped out of the car, and walked into the gas station. The cashier barely looked up as I grabbed a coffee and paid. I tried acting normal, but I kept glancing out the windows toward the highway. Still nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the other car had turned off somewhere. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. So I got back in the car and started driving again. About 5 minutes later, the headlights were back. Same distance, same speed, same two white dots hanging in the darkness behind me. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine. I grabbed my phone to call someone, my dad, the police, literally anyone. But there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I drove faster. The road twisted through sharper mountain curves, snow beginning to fall lightly now, tiny flakes catching in my headlights like static. My breathing got heavier with every glance into the mirror. Then I rounded a sharp bend and saw something that made my blood turn to ice. My own car, driving toward me in the opposite lane. Same make, same model, same scratches on the hood, same bumper sticker my sister gave me in college, same cracked fog light I'd been too cheap to replace. And behind the wheel was me. Hands on the steering wheel, eyes locked forward, face pale in the dashboard glow. As the two cars passed each other, I looked directly into my own face, and it smiled. I slammed on the brakes so hard the car fishtailed across the icy road before coming to a stop. My chest felt tight. My hands were numb. I turned around instantly, expecting headlights, taillights, anything. There was nothing behind me. Nothing ahead of me. Just falling snow, empty road, and my own headlights reflecting off the trees. Then my phone suddenly buzzed. Full signal, one new text message. No number, no contact name, just 6 words. Don't look in your rear view mirror. And before I could stop myself, I looked.